My family forged my signature to sell our ancestral home while I was away. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. I could feel the heavy diesel rumble of the bulldozer vibrating through the wide plank oak floorboards of the house my great-grandfather built. I was standing perfectly still in the shadows of the grand library, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent of old paper, beeswax polish, and aged mahogany. Outside the towering arched windows, a massive yellow cat excavator was idling on the pristine front lawn, its steel treads aggressively chewing up the century-old turf that had hosted generations of summer garden parties. The air was thick with the suffocating smell of exhaust, a violent, industrial intrusion against the fragile beauty of this 150-year-old estate. This wasn't just a house to me. It was a masterpiece of 19th-century craftsmanship, a sprawling architectural marvel of hand-cut stone and massive timber framing that held the very soul of our family history. As a restoration architect, I've dedicated my entire professional life to preserving the past, saving forgotten historical structures from the ruthless swing of the wrecking ball. But I never imagined the most desperate preservation project of my career would be my own home. And I certainly never expected that the person holding the match to my history, the one actively trying to erase our legacy for a quick payout, would share my own blood. How do you look your brother in the eye when he's ready to bulldoze your soul? Julian didn't see the meticulous hand-carved crown molding, the structural integrity of the masonry, or the imported Italian marble fireplaces. He only saw dollar signs, prime suburban real estate, and a desperate, illegal lifeline out of his own catastrophic financial failures. Standing there in the dim light, clutching a heavy manila folder packed with irrefutable legal evidence, my heart hammered a frantic, sickening rhythm against my ribs. In less than 5 minutes, the man who was supposed to have my back for life was going to walk through those heavy oak double doors and attempt to hand over the keys to a cold, corporate developer. He thought I was 5,000 miles away, blissfully unaware of his ultimate betrayal. He thought he had successfully stolen my sanctuary right out from under me. He was about to find out exactly what happens when you try to demolish my life. To understand the sheer magnitude of my brother's deception, you have to understand the bitter tension that infected our family the day my grandfather's will was read. Granddad was a stubborn, brilliant man who spent his twilight years meticulously restoring the estate's crumbling masonry and tending to its vast, overgrown gardens. He knew exactly who Julian was. While I spent my teenage summers helping Granddad repoint the brickwork and study the structural loads of the carriage house, Julian was off running shady hustle after hustle, constantly asking the old man for seed money that inevitably vanished into thin air. Julian is a serial entrepreneur in the worst possible sense, flashy, arrogant, and chronically failing. He views history as useless dust and heritage merely as an untapped financial asset. So, when Granddad passed away 3 years ago, the reading of the will was an absolute explosive disaster. He left the 150-year-old estate entirely to me, the sole owner, because I was the only one who actually respected its history. Julian was left a modest cash trust, which he immediately burned through on a failed crypto venture within 6 months. His fury was palpable, toxic, and entirely unhinged. "You're sitting on a gold mine, Elias," Julian screamed at me during a family dinner, slamming his fist on the antique dining table. "We could subdivide the acreage, sell the main house to a developer, and be set for life." My mother, Eleanor, immediately jumped in to defend him, as she always did. She has lived in deep denial about Julian's toxic behavior for decades. "Elias, darling, family shares the wealth," Mother pleaded, her voice trembling with misplaced guilt. "Your brother is struggling. You can't just hoard all that value while he suffers." I refused to yield an inch. I looked them both dead in the eye and established an absolute, non-negotiable boundary. I told them the house was not a piggy bank, it was not for sale, and I would sooner die than see it chopped up and destroyed by developers. I thought setting that firm line would finally put an end to Julian's relentless scheming. I severely underestimated the depths of a desperate man's greed. I had no idea my strict boundary was the very thing that triggered his criminal plan. The opportunity of a lifetime arrived in the form of a highly prestigious, 6-month architectural restoration contract in Eastern Europe. It was a grueling, immersive project focusing on a 17th-century cathedral, requiring me to live on-site in a cramped, chaotic work trailer with terrible internet. Despite the incredible career advancement, leaving my ancestral home for half a year gnawed at my conscience. I spent weeks meticulously securing the estate, double-checking the alarm systems, and winterizing the delicate original plumbing. The only reason I felt comfortable leaving at all was Thomas. Thomas is our gruff, fiercely loyal, 68-year-old groundskeeper who has lived in the small cottage at the edge of the property for over 40 years. He loved that house just as much as my grandfather did, maybe even more. I handed him a fresh set of keys, fully authorizing him to handle any necessary maintenance. "Don't you let anyone mess with the old girl while I'm gone, Thomas," I told him, patting his shoulder. He gave me a sharp, serious nod. "Only over my dead body, Elias. You just focus on your fancy cathedral." The day before my flight, Julian completely surprised me by dropping by the house unannounced. Gone was the bitter, resentful brother who had screamed at me over the dining table. Instead, he wore a slick, overly friendly smile, carrying a bottle of expensive bourbon that I knew he couldn't actually afford. "Hey, little brother, just wanted to wish you a safe trip," Julian said smoothly, clapping me on the back with practiced, hollow warmth. "I know we've had our differences about the estate, but I'm proud of you. I'll even swing by and check on Thomas occasionally, make sure he's not lonely." Have you ever heard someone tell a lie so smoothly that it actually makes your skin crawl? I thanked him, brushing off his sudden interest as a rare moment of maturity, desperately wanting to believe my family was finally healing. I packed my drafting tools and locked the heavy front doors, convinced my home was perfectly safe. I was completely blind to the fact that I had just handed him the perfect opportunity. For the first 3 months of my overseas contract, everything was completely silent on the home front. I was fully consumed by structural engineering reports, working 14-hour days amidst the dust and scaffolding of the cathedral. My world was entirely reduced to drafting tables, high-stress meetings, and collapsing into my narrow trailer bed exhausted every night. Then, the strange messages began. It started with a seemingly innocent email from Julian, asking highly specific questions about the estate's property taxes and whether Granddad had ever updated the original 1920s surveying maps. "Mom's getting super into family genealogy," Julian wrote in his message. "She wants to frame the old property lines for a heritage project she's doing. Do you remember where the exact boundaries are recorded?" It was an incredibly odd request. My mother had absolutely zero interest in genealogy or historical maps, preferring to spend her time at her country club pretending her eldest son was a massive success. But I was neck-deep in a complex vault restoration, covered in centuries-old dust, and simply too exhausted to critically analyze his motives. I quickly fired back a brief reply, telling him the public records were available down at the county clerk's office if he really wanted to look them up. 2 weeks later, I got another weird text from him asking about the exact spelling of my legal name on the deed, claiming he was setting up a family trust. I rolled my eyes, assuming it was just another one of his misguided, half-baked financial schemes that would inevitably burn out before it even began. I dismissed the red flags, rationalizing that Julian couldn't do any real damage without my physical signature or my presence. I was the sole legal owner, the title was locked up tight, and the massive stone walls of the estate had weathered far worse storms than my brother's empty ambitions. I pushed the family drama to the back of my mind and focused entirely on my architectural work. I ignored the subtle warning signs until a frantic midnight phone call shattered my false security. It was 3 a.m. in Europe when my phone violently vibrated against the thin metal nightstand of my cramped work trailer. The harsh, sudden noise jolted me awake, my heart instantly pounding with that primal dread that only a middle-of-the-night phone call can bring. I fumbled in the dark, squinting at the glaring bright screen. It was Thomas. He almost never called me, preferring to send short, blunt text messages about a broken lawnmower or a leaky pipe. I answered immediately, my voice thick with sleep and worry. "Thomas, is everything all right?" I asked. "Elias, you need to tell me what the hell is going on over here right now." Thomas barked, his voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of sheer panic and deep anger. "There are 3 men in expensive suits walking around the south lawn with flashlights and clipboards. Yesterday afternoon, An entire crew was out here with heavy machinery doing deep soil core testing near the foundation of the carriage house. I sat up so fast I hit my head on the low ceiling of the trailer. Soil core testing? That is a highly invasive, expensive procedure strictly used by commercial structural engineers to determine ground stability before laying a massive new concrete foundation. Did you kick them off the property? I demanded, my architectural instincts screaming that something was catastrophically wrong. I tried. Thomas yelled over the phone. I went out there with my shotgun, ready to run them off, but Julian showed up. He flashed some official-looking paperwork and told me to stand down immediately. He said they were just city inspectors checking for old sinkholes and that you had personally authorized the entire survey. My blood instantly turned to ice in my veins. Julian was actively lying to the caretaker, bringing commercial engineers onto my private land, and using my name to bypass the security I had explicitly put in place. City inspectors do not conduct random, expensive deep soil core testing on private residential estates unless a massive new construction permit has been officially filed. I told Thomas to lock his doors while I frantically booted up my laptop to investigate. The tiny work trailer felt like a suffocating, freezing metal box as I waited an agonizing eternity for my laptop to connect to the weak construction site Wi-Fi. My hands were shaking so violently that I mistyped my password twice before finally breaking through to the desktop. I navigated straight to the county clerk's online public property portal, a database I frequently used in my architectural restoration work to trace the ownership history of old buildings. I aggressively typed in the address of my ancestral estate, desperately praying to see my own name safely listed as the sole title holder. The web page slowly loaded, rendering line by brutal line, until the undeniable truth practically punched me in the face. My name was completely gone from the primary ownership line. In its place, shining like a neon sign of ultimate betrayal, was Julian's full legal name. My stomach violently bottomed out, leaving me gasping for air. I quickly clicked on the transaction history tab, my eyes scanning the heavily digitized documents until I found the smoking gun. Exactly 3 weeks ago, a quitclaim deed had been officially filed and recorded with the county. A quitclaim deed is a legal instrument used to rapidly transfer interest in a real estate property, often utilized between family members to bypass red tape, and it requires absolutely zero background checks or title insurance. According to the official county records, I had supposedly signed away my entire 150-year-old inheritance, completely surrendering my life's work to my brother for the grand total of $10 and familial affection. It was an absolute, brazen, felony forgery. But Julian hadn't stopped there. Right below the fraudulent transfer, there was a bright yellow flag indicating an actively pending commercial transaction. Julian had already signed a massive purchase agreement. He was actively selling the Ancestral estate to a shadowy entity listed as Vance Development Corporation. My own flesh and blood had stolen my heritage and sold it to the highest bidder while I was trapped on another continent. I needed to find out why he was risking federal prison to sell the family home. I didn't sleep a single second for the rest of the night. As the sun began to rise over the European cathedral site, casting long shadows across the scaffolding, I was already on a secure video call with my longtime friend and real estate attorney, Marcus. Marcus is a bulldog of a lawyer who doesn't mince words and thrives on dismantling corporate fraud. As I rapidly explained the forged quitclaim deed and the pending sale to Vance Development Corp., I watched his face shift from shock to a cold, calculated fury. "Give me an hour, Elias," Marcus said, his keyboard already clacking loudly through the speakers. "I'm going to run a deep, comprehensive background check on Julian's current financial status. People do not commit brazen, easily traceable real estate felonies unless they are completely out of options." He was absolutely right. 60 agonizing minutes later, Marcus called me back with a digital dossier that painted a terrifying picture of my brother's secret life. Julian wasn't just struggling. He was financially radioactive. Behind the flashy designer suits and the arrogant smile he wore at family dinners, Julian's last 2 tech startups had completely imploded, leaving behind a massive crater of debt. He was facing an imminent, disastrous personal bankruptcy. But the traditional bank loans were the least of his worries. "Elias, it gets much worse," Marcus said grimly, holding up a printout to the camera. Julian took out massive, highly leveraged loans from unregulated private investors. The kind of shadowy lenders who don't send polite collection letters. They send men to break your legs. He is in default to the tune of $1.5 million, and they are aggressively calling in his debts. The Ancestral estate wasn't just a quick payout for Julian. It was his literal survival strategy. He had forged my signature to secure a massive cash bailout to save his own skin, sacrificing our family's entire history to pay off his toxic gambling and failed business ventures. The sheer magnitude of his selfishness was suffocating. He was perfectly willing to destroy my life to preserve his own fake empire. But the worst revelation was yet to come when I finally researched the commercial buyer's plans. With Julian's pathetic, desperate motive finally exposed, I turned my absolute focus onto the buyer, Vance Development Corporation. I knew from my professional experience as an architect that commercial developers rarely buy 150-year-old residential properties just to flip them. They buy the acreage, and they eliminate the history. I aggressively scoured the local city council websites, digging through digital archives until I found the upcoming public zoning board agenda. My hands grew completely cold as I read through the detailed PDF attachments filed under my home's address. Mr. Vance, the CEO of the development firm, wasn't planning a sensitive historical remodel or a gentle subdivision of the vast grounds. He had officially filed permits to completely demolish the entire 19th century structure. The blueprints attached to the zoning application showed a sprawling, soulless concrete luxury apartment complex complete with a massive paved parking lot sitting exactly where my grand library currently stood. The soil core testing Thomas had witnessed wasn't for sinkholes. It was the final geotechnical requirement needed to clear the site for heavy excavation. They were going to bring in the bulldozers and crush a century and a half of meticulous craftsmanship, memories, and heritage into worthless rubble, all to build cheap, overpriced rental units. The betrayal stung with a fresh, violent intensity. Julian wasn't just selling the house. He was ensuring its absolute, permanent destruction so no one could ever reclaim it. I checked the date on the city permits, my breath catching sharply in my throat as I did the brutal math. The final demolition approval was heavily expedited. The closing on the property, where Julian would formally hand over the keys and receive his massive, unearned wire transfer from Vance, was scheduled to happen in exactly 4 days. The bulldozers were literally staging at the edge of the property line right now. The clock was aggressively ticking down to zero. Calling him out over the phone would only make him finalize the destructive sale even faster. If I confronted Julian right now, screaming threats from a cramped trailer thousands of miles away, I knew exactly how he would react. He would panic, instantly accelerate the closing process, and finalize the fraudulent sale before I could navigate the complex international legal hurdles to stop him. Once Vance Development Corp officially held the keys and moved their demolition crews onto the lawn, the physical destruction of my house would be irreversible. You can win a lawsuit for fraud, but you can never unbulldoze a 150-year-old architectural masterpiece. I needed to act with absolute, surgical precision. I walked straight into my project manager's makeshift office, cited an extreme family medical emergency, and immediately took an indefinite leave of absence from the cathedral restoration. Within 3 hours, I had packed a single duffel bag and was sitting in a taxi racing toward the nearest international airport. I booked a brutal, overnight flight back to the United States, paying an exorbitant premium for a last-minute ticket in cash, so my digital footprint remained minimal. During the agonizing, 14-hour journey across the Atlantic, I maintained absolute radio silence. I didn't text my mother, I didn't alert Julian, and I carefully avoided posting anything online. I needed to remain a ghost. When my plane finally touched down on American soil, I bypassed the main terminal entirely, renting an inconspicuous sedan under my corporate account. I drove straight toward my hometown, but I didn't go anywhere near the Ancestral estate. Instead, I pulled into the deserted parking lot of a dilapidated diner 2 towns over, the designated meeting spot I had arranged with my loyal groundskeeper. Thomas was already waiting in his battered pickup truck, his face etched with deep worry and exhaustion. He handed me a thermos of black coffee and a fresh set of master keys that Julian hadn't managed to confiscate. We sat in the dark, outlining our battle plan. Before I could spring the ultimate trap, I needed to completely destroy the forged legal documents. A forged signature on a quitclaim deed is entirely useless unless it possesses an official notary stamp verifying its authenticity. Marcus, my lawyer, had meticulously analyzed the fraudulent document Julian filed with the county and quickly identified the notary seal. It belonged to a man named Greg, a low-level accountant and a known, sketchy associate from one of Julian's spectacular failed startups. Greg was the weak, crumbling pillar holding up Julian's entire criminal enterprise. The next morning, Marcus and I paid a completely unannounced, extremely aggressive visit to Greg's depressing, strip mall accounting office. Greg looked up from his messy desk, his face instantly draining of all color when he saw my face. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew he had officially certified my signature while I was physically located on another continent. "Elias, what are you doing here?" Greg stammered, his hands visibly trembling as he tried to shuffle papers over his laptop. Marcus didn't even introduce himself. He just dropped a massive, terrifying legal binder directly onto Greg's desk. "You have exactly two options, Greg," Marcus stated, his voice completely devoid of any warmth. "Option A, I contact the FBI right now, present my client's international flight records, and you face 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary for participating in a multi-million-dollar real estate fraud scheme. Option B, you give us absolutely everything you have on Julian right this second, and I let the local police handle your cooperation." Greg was an absolute coward. He didn't even hesitate or try to negotiate. He completely folded in less than 30 seconds, sobbing about how Julian had aggressively pressured him and promised him a $20,000 cut of the sale. He immediately surrendered his phone, allowing Marcus to download the entire history of their text logs. The messages were completely damning, detailing Julian explicitly ordering the forgery. We had the smoking gun. I finally had the irrefutable ammunition I needed to completely dismantle my brother's arrogant, stolen empire. The day of the scheduled closing arrived, bringing with it a heavy, suffocating summer humidity that perfectly matched the crushing tension tightening in my chest. Long before the sun even crested the horizon, Thomas secretly smuggled me onto the grounds through a hidden, overgrown service entrance near the old carriage house. I slipped silently into my own ancestral home, moving like a vengeful ghost through the shadowy, familiar hallways I had spent my entire life fiercely protecting. The house felt strangely violated, hollowed out by the looming, violent threat of destruction. I positioned myself deep in the grand library, concealing myself perfectly in the heavy shadows behind a massive, towering oak bookshelf that overlooked the sweeping front driveway. This room was the architectural heart of the estate, and it was exactly where Julian had arranged to meet the corporate developer for the final, official key handover. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, the loud, aggressive crunch of tires on gravel signaled their arrival. I peered through the dusty, antique window panes and watched as a sleek, black luxury SUV pulled up right next to the massive, idling yellow excavator that had been menacing the pristine lawn all week. Julian stepped out first, wearing a sharp, incredibly expensive Italian suit that he had undoubtedly bought on credit, projecting a sickening aura of arrogant, unearned victory. My mother, Eleanor, stepped out of the passenger's side, beaming with absolute, misplaced pride at her successful son, completely oblivious to the catastrophic felony he had just committed. Finally, Mr. Vance emerged from the back seat, a cold, corporate real estate shark clutching a thick leather briefcase containing the final closing documents. They walked up the grand stone steps, laughing together, entirely ready to carve up my history and feed it directly to the idling bulldozers. I waited in the absolute silence of the library, preparing to spring the ultimate legal trap. I listened to the heavy click of the front door unlocking, followed by the echoing footsteps of my family and the developer entering the grand foyer. "The library is just right through here, Mr. Vance," Julian announced loudly, his voice echoing with absolute, sickening confidence. "It's a magnificent space, though I know your architectural team plans to level this entire wing for the new parking structure." They strolled casually into the library, the morning light streaming through the arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Julian confidently approached the massive antique desk in the center of the room, pulling a heavy set of brass keys from his tailored pocket. Mr. Vance opened his leather briefcase, withdrawing the final stack of closing documents and a gold pen. "Just sign right here on the dotted line, Julian, and the wire transfer for the property clears instantly," Vance said, his tone entirely strictly business. Julian smiled, reaching for the pen. That was my exact cue. I took a deep breath, stepping smoothly out from the dark shadows of the towering oak bookshelves, my footsteps echoing sharply against the hardwood floor. "I wouldn't sign that if I were you, Julian," I said, my voice eerily calm and dripping with absolute, unyielding authority. Julian froze entirely. The gold pin slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering loudly against the antique desk. He slowly turned his head, his face instantly draining of all blood until he looked like a terrified, cornered ghost. The sheer, unadulterated terror radiating from his eyes was an incredibly powerful thing to witness. My mother gasped loudly, her hands flying to her mouth in absolute shock. "Elias? What? What are you doing here? You're in Europe," she shrieked, completely bewildered by my sudden appearance. Mr. Vance looked rapidly between me and Julian, his brow furrowing in deep, annoyed confusion. "Julian, who the hell is this man? And why is he interrupting our closing?" Vance demanded aggressively. I walked straight up to the antique desk and slammed my heavy manila folder down hard. The heavy manila folder hit the antique desk with a resounding, violent slap that made everyone in the room physically jump. I stared directly into Julian's terrified, wide eyes, absolutely refusing to let him look away from the catastrophic destruction he had caused. "I am the actual, sole legal owner of this 150-year-old estate, Mr. Vance," I declared loudly, my voice echoing off the high ceiling. "And the man standing next to you is a desperate, broke fraud who forged my signature on a quitclaim deed while I was working overseas." I quickly opened the folder, aggressively spreading the mountain of irrefutable evidence across the desk for everyone to see. I threw down the original, verified deed proving my sole ownership, followed by my international flight records confirming my location. Then, I dropped the absolute death blow, the printed text message logs between Julian and his corrupt notary, explicitly detailing the illegal forgery scheme, complete with timestamps and price negotiations. Mr. Vance, a ruthless corporate shark who avoided legal liabilities like the plague, snatched up the text logs. His face shifted from confused annoyance to absolute, explosive rage in a matter of seconds. He realized instantly that he had just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on deep soil core testing and expedited demolition permits for a stolen property he could never legally own. "You miserable, lying piece of garbage," Vance snarled, turning his terrifying corporate wrath entirely onto my brother. "You sold me a fraudulent title. Do you have any idea the amount of money my development firm has sunk into the staging of this demolition? I will personally sue you into absolute oblivion." Julian was hyperventilating, physically backing away from the desk like a trapped animal. "Elias, please wait. I can explain everything. I was going to pay you back with the profits," Julian begged, his arrogant facade completely shattering into pathetic, desperate pieces. He didn't get the chance to finish his pathetic lie before the flashing lights appeared outside. Before Julian could spin another desperate, worthless lie, the heavy oak doors of the Grand Library swung violently open. Two uniformed police officers and a plainclothes county detective strode into the room, their expressions grim and entirely focused. Thomas had followed my strict instructions perfectly. He had called the authorities the exact second he saw Julian and the developer walk up the front steps, reporting a felony fraud in progress. The detective completely ignored the chaos and walked straight up to my brother, who was now visibly shaking so hard he could barely stand. "Julian Sterling?" the detective asked, though it was clearly not a question. "We have a sworn affidavit and physical evidence regarding the forgery of legal real estate documents and attempted grand larceny." Julian tried to speak, but only a pathetic, choked squeak escaped his throat as the officer swiftly grabbed his wrists and locked the heavy metal handcuffs into place. The sharp click of the cuffs echoing in the library was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. As they began marching Julian out of the house he had tried to destroy, my mother finally snapped out of her absolute shock. Eleanor launched herself forward, not to comfort her criminal son, but to viciously attack me. "How could you do this, Elias?" she screamed hysterically, tears streaming down her face as she completely ignored the mountain of evidence on the desk. "He is your own flesh and blood. You are entirely ruining your brother's life over a stupid, dusty old house." The sheer, toxic audacity of her statement finally broke any lingering attachment I had to her. I looked at the woman who had enabled a monster for decades, feeling nothing but a profound, icy emptiness. I wasn't the one who ruined Julian's life. His own massive greed and arrogance had completely destroyed him. I asked the officers to escort my screaming mother off the property immediately. I watched the police cruisers pull away, the heavy silence finally returning to my ancestral home. It has been a full year since that chaotic, violent morning in the Grand Library, and the dust has finally, permanently settled on my life. Julian is currently serving a significant federal prison sentence for multiple counts of felony forgery, real estate fraud, and wire fraud. His shadowy, dangerous private investors are the absolute least of his problems now. The commercial developer, Mr. Vance, aggressively sued my brother in civil court, entirely liquidating whatever pitiful assets Julian had left to recoup his lost demolition and surveying costs. True to my own strict boundaries, I officially cut all contact with my mother the day she was escorted off my lawn. She continues to loudly play the tragic victim to her shrinking circle of country club friends, claiming I am a ruthless monster who destroyed our family over bricks and mortar, but her toxic delusions no longer hold any power over my peace of mind. The ancestral estate remains exactly where it belongs, standing incredibly strong and proud, safe from the destructive reach of corporate greed and familial betrayal. I eventually returned to Europe, successfully finished my cathedral restoration contract, and came home to a sanctuary that is entirely mine. Thomas still tends the grounds every single morning, and the massive yellow excavator is nothing but a distant, bitter memory. To anyone watching this video who is struggling with deeply toxic, entitled, or financially manipulative family members, please listen to my warning very carefully. Sharing blood does not give anyone the absolute right to destroy your hard work, ignore your boundaries, or steal your future. A true legacy isn't just about preserving old buildings or hoarding wealth. It is about building a foundation of integrity and defending it fiercely against anyone who tries to tear it down. Sometimes, the only way to save your own history is to let the toxic branches of your family tree completely burn to the ground. Protect what is rightfully yours, because some betrayals are simply too deep to ever be forgiven.